January 1943. Over the darkened skies of the Ruhr, Luftwaffe night fighter pilot Oberleutnant Karl Müller adjusted the tuning dial of his Fu G202 Liechtenstein radar. A strange rhythm crackled through his headset, not static, not Morse, trumpets, drums, swing. It sounded like American jazz, distorted through the ether, pulsing through the night like a heartbeat from another world. His gunner laughed, calling it Yankee music, unaware that this cheerful noise was masking something deadly. Far below, hundreds of RAF and U.S. bombers slipped through the cloud cover unseen. The music wasn't a mistake. It was a weapon, the beginning of a new kind of war, where victory would be won not with bullets but with sound. By 1943, the war over Europe had become a contest not only of men and machines, but of frequencies. Each night, Allied bomber streams crossed the channel under a storm of searchlights and flak, hunted by German night fighters guided by a chain of radar stations. Freya for early warning, Wurzburg for tracking, and Liechtenstein sets aboard aircraft to close the kill. To break that chain, British and American scientists searched for ways to blind the enemy without firing a shot. The Royal Air Force had already discovered the power of deception with window, thin strips of aluminum foil dropped by bombers to confuse radar returns. But in the United States and Britain, radio laboratories were studying something bolder, not to reflect radar waves, but to jam them entirely. At the Telecommunications Research Establishment in Malvern and the U.S. Signal Corps Laboratories in New Jersey, engineers began experimenting with signal modulation, broadcasting tones on the same frequencies as enemy radar. If the timing was right, the radar's receiver would become flooded with noise, rendering its scope useless. To the operators, it would sound like a song gone mad, a rhythm buried under static. And as the tests advanced, those noises began to resemble something familiar. The syncopated beats of American jazz drifting through the radio night. It was music engineered for war, and soon it would dance across the skies of Europe. The German radar network was one of the most advanced in the world. From the coastal Freya stations along the North Sea to the mobile Wurzburg dishes guarding industrial cities, the Reich's defensive web stretched deep into occupied Europe. It was a system built on precision, oscillators, valves, and cathode ray screens guiding fighter control with mechanical discipline. But precision had a weakness: predictability. Once Allied intelligence mapped the German frequencies through captured equipment and Enigma decrypts, engineers realized that even a small burst of interference could cripple the Luftwaffe's eyes. The RAF introduced early jammers, Mandrel to blot out the Freya early warning radars, Koppet to confuse Wurzburg fire control systems. Each emitted pulsing waves that overlapped German frequencies. American crews flying B-17s and B-24s soon joined in, carrying modified transmitters that blanketed the air with wideband noise. At first, German operators dismissed it as equipment failure or enemy radio chatter. But the distortion persisted: rhythmic pulses, bursts of modulation, sometimes even tones resembling music. In the heat of combat, operators described it as dance band noise, unaware that it was the product of Allied oscillators deliberately tuned to musical intervals to disguise the interference patterns. The Reich scientists, brilliant but overstretched, tried to retune their receivers. Yet the enemy's signals moved like melodies, unpredictable, layered, alive. And in those frequencies, a new kind of weapon was taking shape, one that spoke not in code, but in the language of chaos. For the Allies, the battle for control of the airwaves was fought not by soldiers, but by scientists. In quiet laboratories behind blackout curtains, engineers translated music into mathematics. Every note, every beat could become a signal, a pulse, a wave, a weapon. At Britain's Telecommunications Research Establishment, physicist Robert Hanbury Brown and his colleagues experimented with barrage jamming, sending out dense patterns of random tones to smother radar echoes. Across the Atlantic, the U.S. Army Signal Corps in New Jersey and engineers from Bell Telephone Laboratories joined the same race. They learned that by rhythmically modulating their interference, not simply broadcasting white noise, but shifting it like musical syncopation, They could confuse German receivers far more effectively. The concept was simple but devastating. German radar operators expected static or Morse-like pulses. What they heard instead was rhythm, a ghostly wail of harmonics layered like a distorted jazz ensemble. Each instrument of interference covered a different radar frequency. One tone for Wurzburg, another for Liechtenstein, each timed to overlap like drumbeats in a score. The jammers earned names that reflected their strange artistry: Carpet, Mandrel, Jostle, Airborne Cigar. Some were mounted in bombers, others on escorting aircraft that flew parallel to the formation, broadcasting interference in sweeping arcs. To the Allied crews, it was invisible protection. To the Germans, it was maddening. Their scopes filled with crawling shadows, their headsets flooded with rhythm that defied explanation. And so, amid the roar of engines and anti-aircraft fire, an invisible orchestra began to play, conducted not by musicians, but by physicists, each waveform composed to drown out the enemy's precision with a symphony of chaos. While scientists turned waveforms into weapons, the men in the cockpits and radar vans were the ones who felt the strange effects firsthand. In Luftwaffe listening posts from Bremen to Hamburg, operators sat before green screens that suddenly bloomed into chaos. Blips vanished, signals twisted into static and rhythm. Some heard what they swore was music, faint trumpets, a heartbeat of drums buried beneath the hiss. They called it Tanzmusik aus der Hölle, dance music from hell. Reports poured into Luftwaffe headquarters describing the same phenomenon. Radar returns that pulsed in tempo, direction finders spinning uselessly. Technicians blamed humidity, faulty valves, even Allied propaganda broadcasts seeping into their receivers. None realized that the jamming was designed deliberately to mimic musical intervals, a trick of harmonic interference engineered by the Allies to mask its true nature. On the Allied side, aircrews often didn't even realize how effective their airborne jammers were. Bomber Command veterans later recalled hearing strange oscillations in their headsets, soft whoops, ghostly notes, as their aircraft passed through enemy airspace. Some joked that the Germans were trying to play jazz back at them, but behind those jokes was a quiet triumph. For every confused radar operator and every blind night fighter, dozens of bombers made it home that would otherwise have vanished over the Rhine. In the end, the battle wasn't just fought between scientists and soldiers, it was fought between rhythm and order, between improvisation and structure. And in that clash, the Allies had unknowingly chosen the perfect metaphor for their spirit of innovation, a tune that refused to stay in line. By the autumn of 1943, the air war over Germany had reached a fever pitch. The Allies prepared massive night raids on Berlin, Hamburg, and the Ruhr Valley, operations that would stretch the Luftwaffe's defenses to the breaking point. To ensure those bomber streams reached their targets, the Royal Air Force deployed its most ambitious suite of jammers yet: Mandrel, WWII, and Jostle. That November, as nearly 800 aircraft thundered eastward under a moonless sky, the airwaves came alive. From the coast of France to the industrial heartland of Germany, radar screens flared white with interference. Freya stations reported phantom echoes, bogies multiplying across the scopes, until operators could no longer distinguish real bombers from their own noise. In the air, night fighter pilots fared no better. Liechtenstein radars that once locked targets with precision now spat gibberish across their displays. Pilots twisted dials in frustration as their headphones filled with syncopated pulses, strange beats, and warped tones. What had once sounded like faint jazz was now a deafening concert of chaos. Major Heinz Wolfgang Schnaufer, Germany's top night fighter ace, later described missions where his radar turned to music just as he neared the enemy stream. It wasn't just static, it was rhythm, engineered to overwhelm his instruments. As the night wore on, hundreds of bombers slipped through the confusion. Searchlights swept empty skies. Interceptor crews circled aimlessly, blind in the electronic fog. Below, cities burned as Allied incendiaries found their marks. The Germans had once mocked the strange American radio noise. That night they stopped laughing. The rhythm they heard wasn't jazz from a foreign station. It was the sound of their radar dying. In the months that followed, the impact was undeniable. German night fighter control, once the envy of Europe, began collapsing under waves of invisible sound. Every raid grew more chaotic, every interception more uncertain. The Kammhuber Line, Germany's meticulously organized radar defense grid, had been reduced to a guessing game. At the heart of this confusion was the Allied mastery of modulation. Engineers in England had learned to vary their interference in real time, shifting frequencies mid-mission to stay ahead of German counter-tuning. What began as random noise evolved into precise orchestration. Electronic warfare had entered its first true battle, a silent duel across the spectrum. During the February 1944 raids on Leipzig and Augsburg, Luftwaffe controllers recorded entire sectors going dark. Wurzburg radars in Holland and France reported musical interference of rhythmic character. Crews complained of phantom formations that appeared, vanished, and reappeared seconds later. Behind the chaos, flying fortresses and Lancasters struck deep into the Reich with a precision the Germans could scarcely believe. Allied command noted that losses had dropped dramatically, even as missions pushed farther east. The RAF's Bomber Command credited the new jamming tactics as much as improved navigation. In desperation, the Germans introduced the Naxos receiver, designed to home in on Allied radar emissions. But even that system faltered when the Americans began modulating their jammers like melodies, unpredictable and fluid. The Luftwaffe's defenses were being outplayed by rhythm itself. From that point on, the air war over Europe would never sound the same. The music that once mocked the enemy now commanded the night, a strange harmony of noise and silence that spelled the beginning of Germany's aerial defeat. When the smoke cleared over Germany's cities, statisticians began to see the invisible victory written in numbers. In the months following the full deployment of jamming operations, Allied bomber losses dropped by nearly a third. Luftwaffe night fighter efficiency plummeted. Controllers once able to direct interceptions within minutes were now forced to rely on visual spotting or flak bursts. Radar-guided searchlights swept wildly, searching for targets that their instruments could no longer see. German reports from early 1944 described unexplained atmospheric disruptions across the Liechtenstein radar network. In truth, the disruption came from the sky itself, carried by American and British aircraft pulsing with invisible sound. What had begun as an experiment in modulation had evolved into a fully coordinated system of electronic deception. The Reich's defenses, built on precision and mathematics, had been undone by rhythm, by engineers who understood that confusion could be weaponized. For the first time in the war, silence became a form of firepower. By 1945, as Germany's air defenses lay in ruins, the strange radio jazz had vanished from the airwaves, replaced by the quiet hum of victory and reconstruction. But its legacy endured. The same minds that had once orchestrated chaos over Europe became the pioneers of a new discipline, electronic warfare. Their experiments with jamming evolved into radar warning receivers, counter-jamming systems, and early guided missile control. What began as a desperate trick to save bombers became the foundation of modern electronic combat, the art of dominance through disruption. Captured Luftwaffe documents after the war revealed the confusion the music had caused. Some officers genuinely believed the Allies had found a way to transmit sound directly into radar circuits. An impossible feat, but a fitting symbol of how surreal the new warfare had become. In the end, those distorted jazz notes had done what bombs could not. They blinded an empire built on precision and silence. In a war defined by steel, fire, and fear, victory sometimes came from the strangest places, from laboratories, from frequencies, from the notes of a song once banned. The Nazis had declared American jazz entardit music, degenerate music, unfit for the purity of their Reich. Yet in the end, it was those same rhythms, the swing of Armstrong, the syncopation of Ellington, that blinded their skies and silenced their machines. Every pulse that jammed a radar carried an echo of defiance, a reminder that creativity could outthink tyranny. Engineers had turned art into armor, melody into mathematics, and in doing so, they proved that war isn't only fought with bullets, but with ideas. Long after the fires of Berlin faded, the lessons endured. In every modern conflict, the invisible struggle for the spectrum, the hum of drones, the whisper of encrypted signals, carries the same spirit. The day jazz jammed the Reich was the day sound itself became a soldier.